Season 8 of 1,000 Pounds, Sisters had been confirmed, and the announcement spread through social media and news outlets like wildfire, a wave of excitement and anxiety sweeping through loyal fans and casual viewers alike. Yet within the walls of the Slayton household, a profound silence had taken hold that no trailer, tweet, or headline could pierce. Amy Slayton sat cross-legged on the edge of her faded, well-worn sofa, the television casting a soft, flickering glow across her face, eyes reflecting a mixture of weariness and anticipation as she watched the trailer scroll by. The images of herself and her sister Tammy moving across the screen like echoes of her own past. Hope and fear entwined so tightly that they seemed inseparable, each moment of laughter shadowed by the specter of pain, each tear hinting at the battles yet to be faced. Her fingers hovered over the remote, trembling slightly as she paused, muttering under her breath, "Why does it feel like we're standing on the edge of something?" Across town, Tammy sat by her bedroom window, the dim winter sunlight painting her face in muted gold as she scrolled through fan responses on her phone, reading the praise, the questions, the criticism, the endless speculation, the same question that seemed to haunt everyone: why isn't the family speaking up? She leaned back against the cushions, locking the phone with deliberate calm, a rare sensation washing over her, freedom from obligation, from explanation, from defending herself, because this season wasn't merely about numbers on a scale or dramatic confrontations on television. It was about discovering who they were beneath the scrutiny, beneath the expectations, beneath the constant public gaze. Weeks prior, a private family meeting, one never meant for cameras or headlines, had reshaped everything. Old wounds reopened, secrets surfaced, and words had been spoken that could never be retracted, leaving some family members feeling abandoned, misinterpreted, exposed, while others felt compelled to remain silent, to let the story unfold on its own. The silence became its own force, a strange power that allowed imagination to fill in gaps, sometimes with fears far worse than reality, but also allowing the sisters to begin to see themselves in ways that weren't defined by conflict or expectation. Amy's anxiety grew as the premiere approached, the weight of public life pressing down heavier than any number on a scale. The sense of responsibility as a sister, a daughter, a mother, as someone whose life was constantly under the microscope. Each decision scrutinized, each moment dissected. One evening, compelled by a need for connection rather than performance, she went to see Tammy without notifying producers, cameras, or anyone else, a meeting that was only about being sisters, about sharing the unspoken and the unsayable. Sitting across from each other in the quiet of Tammy's living room, Amy whispered, "I know everyone thinks something bad happened." Tammy nodded, her expression unreadable yet soft. Perhaps something did, but perhaps something good as well. They sat in silence, recognizing that they weren't defined by chaos, that the quiet was a space to breathe, to think, to make mistakes, and to begin again without fear of judgment. When the season finally aired, viewers noticed subtle yet profound differences. There were struggles, of course, tears, confrontations, moments of raw emotion, but there were also glimpses of growth, maturity, and the ability to set boundaries. Encounters that could have been explosive were tempered with sincerity, and the family silence became less a void and more a canvas upon which the sisters painted their evolution, demonstrating that transformation doesn't always demand an audience. Tammy, who had long avoided the kitchen because it symbolized temptation, guilt, and years of internal struggle, found herself standing in sunlight streaming through the small kitchen window, warming the counters and filling the room with a sense of possibility. Claire, her new nurse, stood beside her, quietly tying an apron around her waist, a presence that was not instructive but supportive, a guide without judgment, observing without pressure, asking questions without expectation, encouraging Tammy to discover her own agency in even the smallest actions. They prepared a simple stir-fry, not for any audience but for themselves. Each cut of the knife, each sizzle in the pan, a metaphor for breaking away from habits of suffering, isolation, and self-doubt. Silence between them was comforting, and gradually Tammy began to speak aloud about her anxieties, about fear of independence, about concern that her worth would be judged by her weight rather than her effort, her growth, her resilience. Claire listened patiently, offering guidance not in commands, but in perspective, teaching that cooking was not merely about feeding the body, but about asserting control, reclaiming choice and asserting agency in a world where so much of life had been dictated by others. When they sat together at the small table, tasting the simple, fresh meal, Tammy realized she had done something significant, something small yet monumental, a tangible act of self-determination. That night, alone in the kitchen, she looked at the clean countertops, the empty pan, and for the first time, the space felt like a place to begin rather than a battleground. Amy, in parallel, faced her own trials outside the wellness center, gripping her water bottle like a lifeline, confronting fear as she entered a room of other mothers, of strangers who shared her struggles, of community that offered encouragement, rather than criticism, of a space that allowed her to reclaim not just her body, but her identity. Step by step, rep by rep, she found herself moving, sweating, laughing, struggling, succeeding in ways that weren't about comparison or competition, but about presence, about reclaiming the sense that she mattered for who she was, not what she could or couldn't do. That evening, returning home, exhausted yet elated, she found Tammy waiting, sensing the subtle shifts in her sister, the growth born from tiny acts of courage, small victories that accumulated into hope. Amy felt it fully for the first time. In years, a fragile yet undeniable sense that she could indeed build a future in which she was worthy, capable, and deserving of happiness. And so the narrative of season 8 began, quietly but powerfully, a story of sisters navigating change, fear, love, and self-discovery. A season less about spectacle and more about the quiet courage required to rebuild oneself piece by piece, choice by choice, heartbeat by heartbeat. The next morning dawned with a fragile light, a thin veil of sun filtering through the blinds of Amy's bedroom, touching the edges of her pajama sleeves, coaxing a hesitant optimism from the corners of her mind. Today was not just another day. It was the day she had long anticipated with a mixture of excitement and terror, her consultation for plastic surgery, the culmination of years of struggle, self-reflection, and painstaking effort, yet also a moment heavy with uncertainty, fraught with questions that could not easily be answered. Amy's heart pounded with anticipation, a rhythm that seemed to echo the weight of all her past choices, missteps, and small triumphs. She fidgeted with the hem of her pajamas, twisting it between her fingers as she sat on the edge of her bed, thinking of the countless nights spent awake, worrying, doubting, wondering if she would ever feel fully in control of her body, her life, her future. The phone rang, shattering the fragile cocoon of morning silence. Tammy's name flashed on the screen. "Are you ready for this, girl?" Tammy asked, her voice carrying both encouragement and mischief, a gentle reminder that even in moments of vulnerability, there was strength in sisterhood. "I'm not sure, Tam," Amy admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared. What if they say it's too dangerous? What if something goes wrong?" A quiet laugh came through the line, warm and steady. "You underestimate your strength," Tammy said. "Just remember your motivation. You are deserving." Those words, so simple yet so profound, anchored Amy, giving her a sliver of courage that she had not felt in years, a reminder that she had already endured so much and survived, that she could face this too. Driving to the clinic, The car was filled with a quiet tension, a tension that was both anticipatory and grounding, the kind that comes when every nerve feels heightened, every thought loops endlessly between hope and fear. Amy kept her mind on the road, forcing herself to remain present, but her imagination raced ahead, conjuring scenarios of liposuction, stomach reshaping, the tightening of skin she had long despised, the possibility of transformation that had always seemed just out of reach. She tried to visualize the path forward without judgment, to see herself not as she had been or even as others might perceive her, but as she truly hoped to become strong, confident, capable, free of the weight of fear that had dictated her. Choices for so long, when they arrived, the clinic itself exuded a strange calm, the sort of sterile cleanliness tempered by subtle touches potted plants, soft light spilling across polished surfaces, the faint scent of antiseptic intertwined, with hints of flowers that somehow eased the tension in her chest. The receptionist welcomed them with warmth, a human smile in a world often defined by clinical procedures and impersonal routines, and Amy felt a ripple of comfort that she hadn't expected. She was escorted to a bright, airy consultation room, sunlight bouncing off the walls in a way that made the space feel alive, as though the room itself were conspiring to soothe her nerves. She took a deep breath and sat down, the leather chair cool beneath her fingers, her thoughts swirling with memories of diets failed and goals unmet, of social media scrutiny and public expectations, of the weight she had carried both literally and metaphorically for so many years. And then Dr. Caldwell entered, his presence calm, confident, and reassuring, a kind of authority that carried the weight of knowledge without judgment. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Amy," he said, his voice steady, measured, each word deliberate. "Let's talk about your objectives and how to safely achieve them." Amy's chest tightened as she exhaled, a mix of relief and nervous anticipation. She began to speak, articulating her desires carefully smoother contours, confidence in her reflection, a sense of agency in her own body, a reclaiming of the self she felt had been obscured by years of struggle and expectation. Dr. Caldwell listened intently, nodding occasionally, taking notes, his calm demeanor a tether for her scattered thoughts. "Your goals are absolutely achievable," he said finally, his tone confident yet measured. "But first, we need to consider your overall health. We will begin with a comprehensive evaluation, discuss options, and develop a plan that prioritizes safety above all else." Amy's heart raced as he spoke, each procedure he mentioned feeling simultaneously like a promise and a test. The line between hope and fear blurred yet somehow manageable because she was not facing it alone. Tammy held her hand as they left the clinic, a steadying presence that reminded her that she was not navigating this journey in isolation. "So, with dazzling eyes?" Tammy asked, a playful sparkle in her tone despite the gravity of the day. Amy exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of tension lift just slightly. "I'm ready. I'm ready to fight for myself, even if it won't be easy," she said, her voice stronger than she had expected, the tremor of fear replaced by the tremor of determination. Tammy squeezed her hand, a silent affirmation of support, a promise that she would be present, unwavering, no matter what unfolded. The drive home felt lighter, the air of possibility tangible, as though each breath carried the potential of transformation, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally, as if this moment could catalyze a series of changes that extended far beyond surgery. Amy felt hope stirring within her chest for the first time in years, a fragile but insistent pulse that whispered new beginnings, of choices reclaimed, of a future shaped not by fear or expectation, but by her own will, her own courage, and the enduring bond with her sister who had always seen her, understood her, and loved her unconditionally. Meanwhile, Tammy's journey unfolded in parallel, quiet yet no less profound. The kitchen, once a battlefield of temptation and guilt, had become a sanctuary of transformation, a place where small acts held monumental significance. The sunlight that streamed across the counter seemed to illuminate not just the space, but her own potential, casting light on choices that had previously felt impossible. Claire, the nurse who had quietly entered her life, stood beside her, not as a disciplinarian, but as a guide, someone who observed without judgment, asked questions without expectation, and most importantly, believed in Tammy's capacity for change even on days when Tammy doubted herself. Together, they prepared simple meals, each chop, each stir, each seasoning a subtle yet powerful assertion of agency, a reclaiming of control that extended far beyond the culinary act. In those moments of quiet focus, Tammy began to speak of her fears, her anxieties, the lingering self-doubt that had haunted her for years. And Claire listened with the patience of someone who understood that transformation is never linear, that growth is often hidden in repetition and attention, in acts that seem mundane but carry profound meaning. When the meal was complete, Tammy tasted it with a cautious reverence, recognizing the power of her own hands, the tangible proof that she was capable of creating something nourishing, meaningful, and entirely her own. The smile that spread across her face was subtle yet luminous, a quiet triumph, a testament to the slow accumulation of effort, trust, and courage. That night, the empty kitchen, once a symbol of struggle, now felt like a place of potential, a space where the future could be imagined and shaped with intention, a canvas on which she could sketch the outlines of the life she was determined to build. Amy, in her own arc of growth, discovered similar truths through movement and presence. The Wellness Center became a stage for small victories and shared humanity, a space where other mothers, each carrying their own burdens of postpartum, bodies, fatigue, and societal expectations, provided a mirror of resilience, a reflection of shared struggle and mutual support. The exercises were challenging, each squat and plank a confrontation with fear and self-doubt, yet each moment of endurance reinforced the realization that progress was measured not in perfection but in persistence, that strength could be found in trying, in showing up, and claiming space for oneself, even when uncertainty loomed large. By the end of the session, Amy returned home, body exhausted but spirit renewed, carrying with her a subtle yet profound shift, a sense that identity could be reclaimed, that presence mattered more than past failures, that small, deliberate choices accumulated into a foundation upon which a renewed sense of self could be built. Tammy noticed immediately, her eyes reflecting understanding and quiet pride. "You look different," she said, and Amy nodded, feeling the truth of the words resonate. "I feel different now. I succeeded, even if it wasn't perfect." That night, as she tucked her children into bed, a fragile, flickering hope took root in Amy's heart, the understanding that change is incremental, cumulative, and profoundly transformative when nurtured with courage, patience, and self-compassion. Season 8, in these early moments, was revealing itself not as a spectacle of drama or conflict, but as an intimate chronicle of growth, resilience, and quiet triumph, a testament to the power of small actions, persistent effort, and unwavering support. A story that unfolded not in explosive declarations, but in the subtle rhythms of everyday courage and the enduring bond between two sisters navigating the labyrinth of life, expectation, and self-discovery. The days that followed were a delicate dance between fear and courage, uncertainty and resolve, a rhythm that Amy felt in her chest with every step she took outside the familiar boundaries of her home. The world beyond her front door seemed simultaneously vast and intimate, a place filled with potential and peril in equal measure. Each morning, the sunlight creeping into her bedroom reminded her that the day would demand something from her. whether she was ready or not, and yet the pull of possibility was stronger than any hesitation. She navigated her daily routines with a heightened awareness, noticing the subtle shifts in her body, the quiet improvements in stamina, the small victories that were invisible to the camera, but monumental to her own sense of self. There was a deep, almost meditative satisfaction in simply moving through the day with intention, a rhythm she had not known for years, an acknowledgement that even the smallest action, standing a little straighter, choosing a healthier meal, taking a deep breath before responding to a challenge, were acts of rebellion against the inertia of the past. Tammy, across town, was undertaking a similar transformation, the kitchen slowly becoming a sanctuary rather than a battlefield. The simple act of chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, seasoning meals, carried layers of meaning that extended far beyond the culinary. It was about choice, control, and trust in her own judgment, in her ability to make decisions that nourished her body and mind, and in Claire, whose presence was quiet but profoundly grounding. Together, they cultivated a space where mistakes were expected, even embraced, and where the focus was not on perfection but on persistence, on showing up for oneself despite the shadow of fear that had long haunted Tammy's steps. Amy's commitment to the wellness center became a ritual, a sanctuary of movement and shared humanity. Each session presented a unique challenge, and each challenge was a mirror reflecting her own internal dialogue, doubt, comparison, fear interspersed with moments of clarity, laughter, and fleeting triumph. She noticed the women around her, other mothers who carried the weight of postpartum bodies, sleepless nights, societal judgment, and self-imposed expectations. Their struggles mirrored her own, yet they were not competitors. Rather, they were companions, witnesses, and unspoken cheerleaders in the quiet revolution of reclaiming agency over their bodies and minds. Amy realized, halfway through one particularly grueling session, that the fear that had once paralyzed her was now tempered by resilience. Each shaky squat, each trembling plank, each breath drawn through the tension of exertion was a statement. I am present. I'm trying. I am not defined solely by my limitations. She found herself laughing, a spontaneous, liberating sound, as she exchanged glances with another mother who had paused mid-plank. And for a moment, all the insecurities melted into a shared understanding that the journey itself, messy, nonlinear, and challenging, was the point. Meanwhile, Tammy's days in the kitchen grew more complex, layered with the slow accumulation of confidence and insight. Each ingredient she handled, each dish she completed, became a quiet affirmation of her evolving identity. She found herself contemplating the metaphorical weight of each task. The careful slicing of chicken symbolized the deliberate severing of old, self-defeating habits. The steaming of vegetables mirrored the patient cultivation of new, nourishing routines. The seasoning, subtle yet deliberate, represented the nuanced assertion of self-worth that could not be measured by scales or external validation. Claire observed these shifts with gentle affirmation, occasionally posing questions that pushed Tammy to articulate her fears, anxieties, and ambitions, not for the sake of critique, but for the sake of acknowledgement. This partnership, quiet yet profound, allowed Tammy to recognize that change was not a single act, but a continuum of small, deliberate choices, each one laying the foundation for a more intentional, empowered life. Amy's evenings became moments of reflection and planning, a quiet time where she assessed her progress, acknowledged her fears, and considered the steps necessary to achieve the transformation she envisioned. She found herself journaling, capturing the subtle victories and the recurring setbacks with equal honesty, a practice that illuminated the pattern of resilience forming beneath the surface of her anxiety. These entries became a mirror of her internal landscape, revealing the tension between fear and hope, shame and pride, doubt, and determination. Each line of writing reinforced the understanding that transformation, whether physical, emotional, or psychological, required patience, self-compassion, and an unwavering commitment to persist. Even when immediate results were elusive, the sisters, though physically apart, remained intertwined in their journeys, connected by unspoken empathy and shared history. When Amy returned home from a particularly challenging session, her muscles aching and her spirit simultaneously exhausted and invigorated, Tammy greeted her with an intuitive understanding that transcended words. "You look different," she said, and Amy nodded, recognizing that the transformation was not just physical but profoundly internal. "I feel different," she admitted, a confession that carried the weight of months of effort, uncertainty, and self-reflection. This mutual recognition, this silent acknowledgement of struggle and progress, became a recurring motif in their lives, a reinforcement that the journey was theirs alone, yet intertwined with one another in ways that provided strength, perspective, and accountability. The family's ongoing silence, once a source of anxiety and speculation, now served as a buffer, a protective space where the sisters could explore their identities without external interference. It allowed them to confront the residual pain, unspoken conflicts, and personal insecurities that had accumulated over years of public scrutiny and private struggle. In this quiet, they discovered that growth was rarely linear, that setbacks were not failures but opportunities for introspection and recalibration, and that the bonds of sisterhood were strengthened not by constant presence or validation, but by shared understanding and unwavering support when it mattered most. Amid these internal and external shifts, the sisters began to notice subtle changes in perception, both in themselves and in the world around them. Amy's engagement with her children became more intentional, each moment of play, guidance, and care informed by a growing awareness of her own needs and limits. Tammy's approach to nutrition and movement became not a matter of punishment or obligation, but of curiosity, experimentation, and deliberate self-care. Together, they were redefining what success, health, and happiness meant, untethered from the expectations of cameras, producers, and audiences who had long been accustomed to the spectacle of transformation framed by drama and exaggeration. Morning routines, once mechanical and laden with dread, began to carry new significance. Amy found herself greeting each day with a quiet mindfulness, a recognition that her choices, what she ate, how she moved, how she thought, were instruments of empowerment rather than instruments of judgment. Tammy, chopping vegetables for a simple meal, felt the weight of years lift slightly with each deliberate motion, acknowledging that mastery over self was not a final destination but a continuous process of engagement, reflection, and adjustment. In these moments, both sisters began to internalize a critical truth: that transformation, while visible in the external, was first and foremost a matter of internal reckoning, of cultivating resilience, self-compassion, and a willingness to embrace the discomfort inherent in growth. The narrative of Season 8, slowly and intentionally, began to unfold not as a series of explosive confrontations or sensationalized drama, but as a study in quiet courage, resilience, and intimate human connection. Each scene, whether it was Amy's struggle to maintain balance in a fitness class, Tammy's meticulous preparation of a simple meal, or their shared glances across rooms filled with sunlight, carried layers of meaning that transcended the surface-level expectations of reality television. Viewers, drawn in by the tension between anticipation and revelation, began to witness the power of subtlety, the emotional resonance of everyday acts, and the profound impact of support, empathy, and self-determination in the lives of two sisters. Navigating the complex interplay of family, health, and personal growth. By the end of this period, both Amy and Tammy were beginning to feel the cumulative effects of their efforts. Amy's body, though still familiar in its imperfections, was stronger and more responsive, a tangible reflection of her dedication and willingness to confront discomfort. Tammy's confidence, though still tentative at times, was visibly expanding, expressed in the quiet satisfaction of a meal prepared well, a choice made independently, or a fear acknowledged without judgment. Together, they were rewriting their narrative, one deliberate act at a time, cultivating a season of growth that would resonate far beyond the confines of television screens, social media speculation, or public expectation. Season 8, in essence, was becoming a chronicle not of spectacle but of substance, a testament to the quiet power of persistence, intention, and the enduring bond between two sisters committed to carving out a life of meaning, health, and self-respect. Against a backdrop of uncertainty and expectation, the days stretched on like threads of light and shadow, each one bringing new challenges, new revelations, and new opportunities for growth that neither Amy nor Tammy could have anticipated when the season began. Amy's mornings now began with ritualistic intentionality, rising before the house stirred, feeling the faint hum of early sunlight brushing against her skin, her body still tender from previous workouts, muscles quivering with residual fatigue, yet fueled by a quiet determination that had slowly begun to solidify into habit. Each movement, each stretch, each inhale of the crisp morning air outside her bedroom window was a statement of reclamation, of time, of energy, of control over her own body. She had learned that progress was never instantaneous, that transformation was never linear, and that small victories, lifting her children without strain, walking a flight of stairs without breathlessness, completing a plank without shaking, uncontrollably were as meaningful, if not more, than any dramatic moment captured on camera. The Wellness Center became a sanctuary, a theater of effort where she confronted her limitations and discovered reservoirs of strength she had long suspected but never fully accessed. There, in the shared rhythm of sweat, determination, and mutual encouragement, she began to perceive a truth that had eluded her for years. That she was capable, resilient, and worthy of care, not only for others, but for herself. Meanwhile, Tammy's mornings were a study in patience and intention. The kitchen, once a place of trepidation and avoidance, now hummed with a quiet energy, the sunlight spilling across the counters like a warm promise of possibility. Claire, her steady guide, was there to anchor her when doubt crept in, to pose questions that encouraged reflection rather than judgment, to provide a quiet companionship that allowed Tammy to confront her anxieties without fear. Today they were preparing a simple omelet with fresh vegetables, a meal that required careful attention yet offered tangible reward. Each motion whisking eggs, slicing peppers, tending to the pan was imbued with layers of meaning. A choreography of autonomy that Tammy had rarely experienced before. She found herself talking aloud, a soft confession of lingering fears. The fear that she would never fully control her impulses, the fear that public perception would overshadow personal achievement, the fear that despite her efforts, she might still fail. Claire listened without interruption, nodding, occasionally offering insight that reframed anxiety into opportunity, hesitation into strategy. In those quiet moments, Tammy discovered that cooking was not merely sustenance, but a medium through which she could assert agency over her body, her choices, and her environment, a practice in mindfulness and deliberate action that extended far beyond the confines of the kitchen. Amy, on her part, began to notice subtler shifts in herself as well. Beyond the physical changes, the increased stamina, the stronger core, the improved endurance, there was a transformation in perception. She no longer approached challenges with immediate panic or self-doubt, but with measured consideration, a mental space that allowed for mistakes without judgment, setbacks without despair. Even interactions with her children, once dominated by exhaustion and frustration, now carried a new rhythm of patience and presence. She noticed how her voice softened when guiding them, how her responses contained deliberate warmth, how her physicality no longer dictated the tempo of her days, but responded to it with an agility born of attention and effort. The mirror became less an arbiter of failure and more a reflective surface for acknowledgement. Each glance a quiet nod to the endurance, discipline, and courage that had brought her to this point. The sisters' journeys, though physically distinct, remained deeply interconnected. Amy shared her experiences with Tammy in the evenings, recounting triumphs and setbacks with candidness, her words a bridge between their parallel paths. Tammy, in turn, shared reflections from her work with Claire, the small victories that accumulated, quietly yet powerfully over time. These exchanges, often brief and understated, became lifelines, a reminder that the path to transformation was not traversed alone, that empathy, witness, and mutual understanding were as vital to growth as exercise, nutrition, or procedural interventions. The silence that once defined their family's approach now functioned as a protective buffer, allowing these intimate conversations to exist without external interference, free from misinterpretation or unsolicited judgment. As the season progressed, new challenges emerged, subtle yet demanding. Amy encountered a day when fatigue threatened to overpower resolve, when her legs shook with every squat and her arms trembled mid-plank. Doubt reared its head with a familiar intensity. Why bother if progress was so slow, if change remained stubbornly incremental? Yet in that moment, a glance around the wellness center reminded her she was not alone. Other mothers strained beside her, breathing heavily, wiping sweat from their foreheads, laughing quietly at shared struggle. One woman offered an encouraging word, a single sentence. "You're doing more than you think." That simple acknowledgement struck Amy profoundly, a reminder that growth was often invisible, cumulative, and relational. Tammy, too, faced moments of discomfort and confrontation with herself. While preparing lunch for the first time without immediate guidance, she realized she had a tendency to sabotage the process, doubting her choices, hesitating mid-action, succumbing to internalized criticism. The knife in her hand felt heavier than it had any right to, a symbol of the weight she had carried for years, expectations unmet, internalized guilt, and the remnants of shame that had long defined her relationship with food, health, and personal autonomy. Claire's earlier advice returned to her in fragments. Control is choice. You have a say in what enters your body. That small, seemingly simple assertion became an anchor, and Tammy completed the meal with quiet determination, tasting the result with a mixture of pride and disbelief. She had created something nourishing, deliberate, and entirely her own, and the subtle thrill of accomplishment coursed through her like warmth spreading through chilled limbs. Evenings brought reflection and connection. Amy would sit quietly with her children after tucking them into bed. The world hushed around her, and she would trace the arc of the day, the stretches completed, the steps taken, the internal victories hard won yet often invisible. Each small act, she realized, was a form of rebellion against the inertia that had once dominated her life, a reclaiming of presence and self-determination. Tammy, in parallel, would linger in the kitchen after a long day, the countertops now gleaming in the soft glow of overhead lights, and feel the accumulated weight of effort and attention settle into quiet satisfaction. These were not dramatic transformations, nor were they easily broadcast moments of triumph, but they were deeply meaningful, signaling that change true. Lasting change was happening incrementally, profoundly, and authentically. The sisters' continued engagement in these parallel yet intertwined journeys began to manifest in subtler ways in their day-to-day lives. Amy noticed she could sit more fully with discomfort, acknowledging tension without immediate retreat. Tammy discovered a growing patience with herself, allowing for mistakes without framing them as failures. Both began to experience a slow recalibration of expectations, internally recognizing that growth was a process, not a performance, and that the metrics of success were best measured by presence, resilience, and intentionality rather than external validation. Season 8, in its early chapters, was unfolding not as a narrative of sensationalized drama, but as a chronicle of subtle evolution, of two women negotiating the boundaries between self-doubt and self-assertion, fear and courage, expectation and authenticity. The audience, drawn into this intimate landscape, found themselves witnessing not spectacle but transformation, the kind that resonates because it is painstakingly real, emotionally complex, and unflinchingly human. Each scene, whether it was Amy navigating her first plank, Tammy mastering a simple meal, or their quiet exchanges reflecting shared understanding and mutual encouragement, became a testament to the power of deliberate, sustained effort and the capacity for change that lies dormant in all who dare to confront fear with intention. By the close of this chapter, both sisters were beginning to perceive the contours of their evolving selves with greater clarity. Amy's physicality, though still a work in progress, reflected her persistence and patience. Tammy's confidence, though nascent, was unmistakably growing, revealed in her actions, her choices, and the quiet pride radiating from her demeanor. Together, they were crafting a season that was less about external spectacle and more about internal mastery. A story not of dramatic confrontations, but of courage, resilience, and the slow, deliberate reclamation of identity, health, and autonomy. Season 8, in essence, was transforming into a living testament to the quiet, enduring power of effort, connection, and the courage to face oneself without apology, judgment, or distraction. The rhythm of their days began to solidify, a cadence that intertwined effort with reflection, struggle with triumph, doubt with clarity. Amy had started waking before the sun, the quiet of early morning offering her a strange kind of sanctuary, a world untouched by expectation or judgment, where the only challenge was to face herself honestly. Each stretch, each lift, each breath, drawn in deliberate focus, was both ritual and rebellion, a subtle defiance against years of inertia and external pressures. Her muscles, still tender from previous sessions, protested with gentle reminders of limits. But Amy had learned to interpret those protests not as warnings to stop, but as evidence of growth, a language of the body communicating in ways that the mind had often ignored. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying scents of dew and earth, and each inhalation became a meditation in presence, a reminder that she was capable of exertion, patience, and change all at once. She moved through the wellness center like a traveler rediscovering a landscape she had once known but never fully explored, noticing the textures of mats under her hands, the rhythm of synchronized breathing around her, the subtle encouragement that radiated from others who were struggling as she was. There was no competition here, only a shared labor of reclamation, a mosaic of effort that reflected both individuality and community. Tammy's kitchen became similarly sacred, the sunlight pouring over countertops like a benediction. Each meal she prepared a quiet act of intentionality. The simple act of chopping vegetables, which once carried undertones of fear and judgment, now felt purposeful, deliberate, almost meditative. Claire's presence, steady and reassuring, was not intrusive but supportive, a silent partner in Tammy's reclamation of agency. With each stir of a pan, each careful seasoning, Tammy realized she was enacting a form of control that extended far beyond the kitchen. Control over habit, over choice, over the way she engaged with her own life. It was in these small, deliberate acts that Tammy began to understand that mastery over self was less about perfection and more about presence, being fully engaged in the moment, acknowledging fear without surrendering to it, and asserting agency over decisions that had long been dictated by circumstance, expectation, or internalized doubt. She caught herself smiling softly at the culmination of a well-prepared meal, recognizing that the act of creation, however modest, was also an act of self-affirmation, a declaration that she could shape her life, even in incremental ways. Amy began noticing subtle shifts in how she related to her children. The chaos of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and constant attention had once felt all-consuming. Yet as her own awareness and energy grew, she found herself responding with more patience, more intention, and a softer, more attuned presence. Her voice, previously strained by fatigue, now carried a measured warmth that allowed her children to feel both nurtured and guided. She noticed how moments of connection, like reading a story together or sharing a meal, now held a deeper resonance, reflecting the internal work she had done on herself rather than external pressure to perform or be perfect. These shifts, invisible to any observer beyond the family, were deeply felt, evidence that transformation was as much about perception and intention as it was about physical change. Tammy, in parallel, confronted moments where her confidence wavered. While preparing a new recipe alone, she found herself hesitating mid-task, questioning whether her choices were correct, whether the meal would turn out as expected, whether her efforts mattered in the grander scope of change. She recognized the familiar spiral of doubt, a residue from years of internalized criticism and societal expectation. But this time she responded differently. She paused, inhaled deeply, and reminded herself of Claire's words, "Control is choice." That affirmation became a mantra, guiding her hands and mind, transforming hesitation into deliberate action. The meal, once completed, was more than sustenance. It was a tangible manifestation of autonomy, patience, and confidence slowly reclaimed. The sisters' quiet check-ins became increasingly meaningful, brief exchanges that bridged their physical distance and internal reflections. Amy would recount her struggles and small victories from the fitness center, while Tammy would share insights from her cooking and self-care routines. These conversations, stripped of performance or expectation, were lifelines offering empathy, validation, and the subtle reinforcement that the journey was shared even when experienced individually. The silence of the wider family, once a source of anxiety, now functioned as a protective space, insulating the sisters from external scrutiny while allowing internal transformation to take root. In the wellness center, Amy encountered a day that tested her both physically and mentally. Squats became heavier, planks trembled beneath her weight, and each repetition was a reminder of past limitations. Her muscles ached, sweat dripped down her forehead, and for a moment, doubt threatened to overtake resolve. But the glance around her, at women who were also struggling yet persevering, reminded her of the collective courage present in the room. Encouragement, whispered advice, and shared laughter reminded Amy that transformation was relational, not solitary, and that progress was often invisible to outsiders but palpable to those engaged in the struggle. A nearby mother offered her a simple sentence, "You're doing more than you think." And in that moment, Amy felt a profound reassurance that she was on the right path, that perseverance mattered more than perfection. Tammy, too, faced moments of confrontation with herself. Attempting a complex meal without Claire's direct guidance, she realized the depth of her prior dependence, the extent to which self-doubt had permeated every decision. The knife in her hand felt symbolic, the weight of past failures and shame pressing upon her. But she remembered the affirmations, the mantra of choice, and proceeded with deliberate intent, completing the meal with care and pride. The satisfaction of accomplishment, though quiet and unremarkable to an outside observer, resonated deeply, signaling that incremental mastery over self was both possible and profoundly empowering. Evenings offered reflection and the quiet consolidation of lessons learned throughout the day. Amy would sit by the children's bedside, noting small changes in stamina, patience, and presence, journaling the internal victories that were too subtle for public acknowledgement. Tammy lingered in the kitchen after a long day, the counters gleaming, absorbing the satisfaction that came from deliberate, intentional effort. Each sister was learning, in her own way, that the accumulation of small, consistent actions was the foundation of sustainable transformation, and that courage, once summoned, could be nourished in increments, reinforced by reflection and shared empathy. Season 8, in these emerging chapters, began to reveal a new narrative, one defined not by spectacle or drama, but by internal courage, resilience, and deliberate action. Each scene, whether Amy maintaining posture in a fitness class or Tammy asserting autonomy in the kitchen, conveyed the nuanced reality of transformation: slow, deliberate, messy, yet profoundly authentic. Audiences, drawn to the subtle tension between anticipation and quiet accomplishment, witnessed a story not of immediate gratification but of enduring effort, an illustration of the power of persistence and intentionality in the face of fear, doubt, and historical patterns of behavior. By the close of this chapter, the sisters were beginning to internalize the truth that growth, though invisible to the casual observer, was profound and consequential. Amy's body, increasingly responsive and strong, reflected the cumulative effect of her efforts. Tammy's confidence, steadily expanding, was observable in small gestures, choices, and the quiet pride radiating from her demeanor. Together, they were crafting a narrative of Season 8 that emphasized substance over spectacle, courage over compliance, and incremental mastery over superficial transformation. Theirs was a story of endurance, reflection, and self-determination, a chronicle that would resonate far beyond television screens, social media commentary, or fleeting external validation. The rhythm of transformation was neither uniform nor gentle. It arrived in waves, some quiet, some overwhelming, and often all at once, leaving Amy and Tammy both exhilarated and exhausted. Amy's mornings had taken on a new gravity, a solemnity that mingled with anticipation, a recognition that each step, each movement, each deliberate breath was both a challenge and a declaration of self-worth. She moved through her fitness routines with a mindfulness she had never possessed before, attuning herself to the subtle language of her body, the tremor in her arms, the ache in her thighs, the way her heart raced not as a sign of defeat, but as a measure of exertion and endurance. Each completed plank, each sustained squat, each deliberate stretch was a small victory, a testament to resilience that could not be captured by cameras or measured in numbers alone. It was deeply personal, a quiet yet powerful affirmation of agency in a life that had often felt dictated by external forces. Family expectations, public scrutiny, and the relentless pressure of being the sisters rather than individuals. With agency, Tammy, across town, was confronting her own evolving landscape of fear and self-doubt in the kitchen. The sunlight that streamed over the countertops felt almost tangible, warming the space and imbuing her movements with purpose. Today, she was tasked with preparing a layered vegetable casserole, a dish that demanded focus, patience, and deliberate precision. As she washed, sliced, and seasoned, she became acutely aware of the years she had spent avoiding these moments, the anxieties that had paralyzed her, the perfectionism that had smothered creativity and autonomy. Yet Claire's gentle presence, her soft encouragement, and the absence of judgment allowed Tammy to inhabit the space fully. to engage with her task as an act of self-assertion rather than compliance. Each movement became a meditation, each choice a subtle reclaiming of control over her life, her body, and her decisions. She felt a swelling of quiet pride as she completed the dish, a moment of accomplishment entirely divorced from the gaze of television or audience approval, a personal milestone of deliberate action and self-determination. Amy's journey extended beyond the fitness center into moments of intimate reflection and personal reckoning. She observed herself in the mirror after each session, noticing incremental changes not just in her physique, but in posture, confidence, and composure. Even when fatigue threatened to dominate her consciousness, she found solace in acknowledging progress, however subtle. The mental discipline cultivated during exercise, patience, resilience, focus began seeping into daily interactions, transforming the way she approached her children, her household, and herself. Tasks that had once seemed insurmountable getting through a long day without succumbing to frustration, responding calmly to challenges, maintaining mindfulness under pressure were now met with quiet determination and increasing ease. She began to recognize that transformation was layered, physical, mental, emotional, and relational, each facet interdependent yet uniquely demanding. Meanwhile, Tammy's experiences in the kitchen became emblematic of deeper shifts within herself. The act of preparing a meal was now more than sustenance. It was a deliberate exercise in autonomy, patience, and trust. She noticed the subtle courage it took to make choices without immediate validation, the discipline required to execute a plan without fear of imperfection, the satisfaction derived from tangible results of effort. Claire's quiet mentorship reinforced these lessons, offering support while allowing Tammy to navigate discomfort and uncertainty independently. The meal, once prepared, became a moment of reflection, a tangible testament to deliberate action, and the quiet accumulation of competence. In these spaces, Tammy discovered that growth was not linear, nor was it always visible to the outside world. Rather, it was an internal process, unfolding incrementally, quietly, and profoundly. As the season progressed, moments of unforeseen challenge emerged, testing both sisters' resolve. Amy encountered days when her body refused to cooperate, when planks felt impossibly long and squats unmanageable, when fatigue and frustration threatened to override determination. In these moments, she was forced to confront the tension between ambition and limitation, to reconcile the desire for visible progress with the reality of incremental change. Yet she learned to navigate these struggles with patience and self-compassion, drawing on the supportive energy of the wellness community, the guidance of instructors, and the quiet encouragement of peers. Each small triumph, each moment of perseverance, reinforced the emerging truth that courage was cultivated not in ease, but in the confrontation with challenge, and that persistence in the face of discomfort was the true measure of strength. Tammy faced analogous challenges, though theirs were less physical and more psychological, emotional, and relational. The kitchen, once a site of anxiety and avoidance, occasionally became a mirror reflecting her self-doubt, hesitation, and fear of imperfection. Tasks that appeared simple, preparing a balanced meal, following a recipe accurately, making independent choices, carried the weight of historical failure, of years of internalized criticism and societal expectation. Yet, with Claire's guidance and her own developing resilience, Tammy began to confront these fears directly, learning to accept mistakes as learning opportunities, to celebrate incremental victories, and to recognize the inherent power in making conscious, deliberate choices. Each completed meal was a quiet, profound affirmation that she could act autonomously, that she could navigate discomfort, and that she could cultivate competence, confidence, and self-respect from within. Evenings became a time of reflection, consolidation, and connection. Amy, after tucking her children into bed, would review her day in quiet contemplation, acknowledging both victories and setbacks. She would journal, capturing the internal triumphs that often went unseen, translating the physical exertion and emotional resilience into words that articulated her evolving understanding of self, health, and agency. Tammy, in parallel, lingered in her kitchen, absorbing the satisfaction of deliberate accomplishment, internalizing the lessons of the day, and recognizing the quiet but profound impact of small, consistent actions. In these reflective moments, both sisters began to appreciate that transformation was as much about perception, intention, and self-awareness as it was about physical change or public validation. The narrative of Season 8 was unfolding as a quiet, deliberate chronicle of resilience, effort, and internal courage. Amy's struggles and triumphs in the wellness center, Tammy's incremental mastery in the kitchen, and their shared moments of empathy and connection painted a portrait of transformation that was profoundly human, relatable, and inspiring. Viewers were drawn not to spectacle but to substance, witnessing the slow accumulation of skill, confidence, and self-respect, understanding that the power of change resided as much in consistency, intention, and awareness as in dramatic outcomes or external recognition. By the close of this chapter, both sisters had begun to internalize the depth and scope of their transformation. Amy's body reflected increasing strength, endurance, and adaptability. Her mind exhibited resilience, patience, and presence. Tammy's confidence, steadily expanding, manifested in deliberate action, thoughtful decision-making, and self-assured engagement with her environment. Together, they were crafting a narrative that emphasized growth, courage, and sustained effort over superficial spectacle or temporary achievement. Season 8, in these moments, was less a televised journey and more a living testament to the power of deliberate, sustained engagement with self, the quiet accumulation of mastery, and the courage to confront fear, doubt, and historical patterns with intention and resolve. The turning point of Season 8 began to emerge, not in grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but in subtler, more profound shifts, those quiet moments that revealed the depth of change, the resiliency forged through struggle, and the internal courage cultivated day by day. Amy's mornings had begun to carry a new weight of expectation, but not the kind imposed by others. It was the pressure she placed on herself, tempered by a growing confidence that whispered of potential and capability. She noticed herself rising, with less effort, her body more willing to engage in the exercises she once approached with trepidation. The stretches that had once seemed insurmountable became routine, yet each repetition still carried the gravity of personal victory. Even planks, squats, and controlled lifts, exercises that challenged every fiber of her body, were no longer merely physical. They had become meditative acts, tests of perseverance, and small declarations of self-respect. With each session, Amy began to internalize a fundamental truth. Change, real and lasting, required persistence, mindfulness, and the courage to engage with discomfort rather than avoid it. Tammy, across town, experienced a similar awakening, though hers was more psychological and emotional than physical. The kitchen, which had once felt like a place of judgment and anxiety, had transformed into a sanctuary, a studio where deliberate choices, careful preparation, and quiet reflection became acts of mastery and assertion. Claire's patient guidance allowed Tammy to explore her capacity for autonomy, reinforcing the understanding that mistakes were not failures but opportunities for learning. Today, as she prepared a multi-step meal independently, Tammy noticed how instinct and awareness had begun to align. She moved with intention rather than fear, adjusted when things went awry without panic, and found herself smiling quietly at the culmination of effort that resulted in a nourishing, thoughtfully prepared dish. In that moment, Tammy realized that the lessons of the kitchen extended far beyond meals. They were lessons in agency, discipline, and the subtle art of trust, first in another person and then gradually in oneself. Amy began to notice the effects of her efforts beyond her physical endurance. Her interactions with her children took on new dimensions. The patience she cultivated during exercise spilled into her parenting, allowing her to respond with measured calm where frustration once dominated. She observed the small shifts in her own behavior, the deliberate pauses before reacting, the softening of her tone, the capacity to maintain presence even amidst chaos, and felt a quiet pride in the incremental changes that had begun to ripple through her daily life. These victories, invisible to the casual observer but deeply meaningful to Amy, illustrated that the journey of transformation extended far beyond appearance or performance. It was about resilience, perception, and the ability to engage fully with each moment without succumbing to fear or self-judgment. Tammy, reflecting on her own journey, recognized similar patterns of growth. Her confidence, though still fragile in some moments, had begun to manifest in concrete ways. She prepared meals with deliberation rather than anxiety, made choices without immediate reassurance, and allowed herself to experience satisfaction in the outcomes of her efforts. Each completed dish, each small accomplishment, became a marker of incremental progress, a visible sign of the quiet mastery she was cultivating over her habits, decisions, and self-perception. The kitchen, once a source of dread, now represented possibility, autonomy, and a space for personal triumph. Tammy discovered the power of consistency and intentionality, understanding that meaningful change was not measured in dramatic leaps, but in sustained, mindful effort repeated over time. The sisters' parallel journeys began to converge in subtle yet meaningful ways. Amy would share reflections from her fitness sessions, moments of doubt, small victories, the evolving awareness of strength and endurance, with Tammy during brief but emotionally resonant conversations. Tammy, in turn, recounted lessons from her kitchen routines, the incremental confidence gained through deliberate action, and the satisfaction derived from creating something nourishing entirely on her own. These exchanges became a lifeline, a reinforcement of the notion that growth was not a solitary endeavor, but a shared relational experience. The silence of the larger family, once a source of anxiety and speculation, now functioned as a protective space, allowing both sisters to engage with their journeys authentically, free from external judgment and misinterpretation. Mid-season, Amy confronted one of her most challenging days yet. Her body felt uncooperative, her energy flagging, and self-doubt threatened to derail the session entirely. The plank that had once seemed manageable now felt like an insurmountable mountain. The squats brought tears to her eyes from frustration and fatigue. Yet, as she glanced around the wellness center, she saw others enduring similar struggles, their resolve unwavering despite visible difficulty. The shared human experience in the room, the synchronized struggle, the encouragement exchanged in passing, the laughter born of mutual perseverance reminded Amy that transformation was not linear, and that her efforts were valid and meaningful, even in the face of resistance. A whispered comment from a nearby mother, "You're stronger than you think," resonated deeply, reinforcing the emerging awareness that courage, persistence, and self-compassion were the true measures of progress. Tammy faced an equally pivotal moment in her own journey. Tasked with preparing a multi-course meal alone, without Claire's immediate guidance, she initially experienced panic and hesitation, her internal critic weighing heavily upon her. Yet she paused, recalled Claire's mantra that mistakes were opportunities rather than failures, and proceeded deliberately, attending to each detail with focus and patience. When the meal was completed, Tammy experienced a sense of triumph that went far beyond culinary accomplishment. She had exercised agency, made deliberate choices, and demonstrated resilience in the face of fear. That quiet victory became emblematic of her broader transformation, a signal that internal mastery and confidence could be cultivated incrementally, independent of external validation or oversight. Evenings provided space for reflection and synthesis of the day's lessons. Amy would sit by her children after tucking them into bed, journaling both achievements and setbacks, translating the physical exertion, mental discipline, and emotional resilience into narrative form. Tammy lingered in the kitchen, absorbing the satisfaction of deliberate accomplishment, recognizing that the quiet, incremental victories of the day were the foundations of long-term transformation. Together, these reflective practices underscored the principle that growth was as much about awareness, intention, and internalization as it was about external performance or recognition. The narrative arc of Season 8 began to crystallize in these moments. It was no longer solely a story of weight loss or spectacle. It had evolved into a chronicle of resilience, courage, and deliberate action, illustrating the power of persistence and mindful engagement with self. Amy's bodily strength, endurance, and emerging confidence mirrored the inner resilience she had cultivated, while Tammy's autonomy, intentionality, and quiet mastery demonstrated the profound impact of sustained, deliberate effort. The audience, witnessing these subtle yet transformative processes, became invested not in dramatized conflicts, but in authentic human struggle, resilience, and the tangible, incremental victories that define the sisters' evolving journeys. By the close of this chapter, both sisters had begun to recognize the depth of their transformations. Amy's body and mind reflected resilience, patience, and presence. Tammy's confidence, grounded in deliberate action, manifested in both competence and self-assuredness. Season 8 was shaping into a narrative defined by substance, authenticity, and sustained effort rather than sensationalism. Theirs was a story of courage cultivated through deliberate engagement with self, a testament to the quiet yet profound power of consistency, reflection, and the willingness to confront fear, doubt, and historical patterns with intention and resolve. The momentum of transformation accelerated for Amy and Tammy, not in sudden bursts, but in the steady accumulation of effort, introspection, and quiet victories that compounded into profound change. Amy awoke to a morning suffused with possibility, the sun spilling across her room in long, golden streaks that seemed to illuminate not only the space around her, but the subtle shifts within herself. Today, her body felt more responsive, her mind more focused, her spirit more resilient. Each stretch, squat, and breath held new purpose, a deliberate alignment of mind and body, awareness and action, trial and triumph. She approached the wellness center with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension, the familiar anxiety tempered now by the awareness that she had faced harder days and had emerged stronger, more capable, more attuned to her body's language. The first exercises of the day were physically demanding, yet Amy met them with a patience and persistence born of months of practice. Noticing the micro adjustments her muscles made, the way her posture improved with subtle corrections, the rising pulse that spoke not of strain but of capacity. She began to see that mastery over self was not a sudden epiphany, but the quiet recognition that each deliberate choice, each act of effort, each encounter with discomfort accumulated into something profound, tangible, and lasting. Tammy's world, in parallel, continued to transform in ways both subtle and significant. The kitchen, once a site of anxiety and avoidance, had become a laboratory for self-discovery, agency, and confidence. Today, she faced a complex task, preparing a multi-component meal that demanded both precision and timing. The knives, the chopping board, the simmering pots, they were no longer instruments of fear, but tools of intentionality. Claire's guidance, always gentle and unobtrusive, encouraged Tammy to trust herself, to embrace mistakes as part of learning, and to internalize the lessons of process rather than outcome. With each measured motion, Tammy began to experience a quiet empowerment, the kind that arises not from applause or recognition, but from self-reliance and conscious engagement with the task at hand. When the meal was complete, she observed it with satisfaction and a newfound sense of pride that transcended the culinary accomplishment itself. It was evidence of capability, resilience, and the incremental building of self-trust. Amy's engagement with the wellness center began to ripple into her family life in unexpected ways. The patience, awareness, and endurance cultivated during her sessions began to permeate interactions with her children, creating moments of connection and empathy that had once felt elusive. She noticed how minor adjustments in posture, tone, and response could transform moments of tension into spaces for guidance, understanding, and shared joy. The exercises that had once seemed purely physical now held relational and emotional significance, shaping her capacity to engage meaningfully with her family and to model resilience, determination, and mindful presence. Amy realized that the work she was doing was not merely about personal achievement, but about cultivating an internal framework of strength, focus, and calm that could guide her in every aspect of her life. Tammy, too, observed subtle transformations in how she approached decision-making and personal responsibility. The deliberate, mindful practice of cooking, making independent choices, embracing mistakes, and seeing the tangible outcomes of effort translated into a broader understanding of her capacity to influence her own life. Each meal prepared independently became a symbolic act of autonomy, a testament to the cumulative power of small, intentional actions, and a reminder that confidence and self-efficacy were cultivated incrementally through practice, reflection, and engagement. The kitchen was no longer merely a space for sustenance. It had become a venue for psychological and emotional growth, a crucible in which patience, resilience, and self-trust were forged in quiet, persistent practice. As the season progressed, the sisters encountered challenges that tested their resolve in new dimensions. Amy faced days when her body resisted, when fatigue and frustration threatened to overshadow progress, and when doubt crept in despite months of deliberate effort. The plank that had once been difficult now seemed interminable. Squats burned deeper, and her stamina faltered. Yet as she looked around the wellness center, she saw other mothers grappling with similar struggles, their faces mirroring effort, perseverance, and silent encouragement. A whispered remark from a fellow participant, "You're stronger than you realize," resonated deeply, a reminder that persistence and courage were measured not by flawless execution, but by the willingness to engage, to continue despite discomfort, and to embrace the iterative nature of growth. Amy's internal dialogue shifted, no longer dominated by fear or self-criticism, but guided by reflection, patience, and recognition of incremental success. Tammy confronted a parallel crucible in her kitchen, preparing a multi-component dish without Claire's immediate presence. She initially felt apprehension, uncertainty, and the lingering shadow of prior self-doubt. Yet she recalled Claire's encouragement, the reminder that mistakes were integral to growth rather than failures, and proceeded deliberately. Each step, washing, chopping, seasoning, cooking, became an exercise in focused presence and controlled autonomy. The successful completion of the meal was not merely about nutrition or culinary skill. It represented a profound internal victory, a tangible manifestation of competence, resilience, and the ability to act decisively despite fear. Tammy recognized that these incremental moments were building the foundation for sustained confidence, not in isolated bursts, but through consistent, mindful practice repeated over time. The sisters' parallel journeys, though distinct, converged. in moments of shared understanding, brief conversations, and mutual encouragement. Amy would recount her challenges, triumphs, and reflections from the Wellness Center. Tammy would relay her own experiences of independence, accomplishment, and subtle mastery in the kitchen. These exchanges, unmediated by cameras or external expectations, reinforced the understanding that growth was relational as well as individual, and that shared acknowledgement, empathy, and support could amplify resilience, fortitude, and motivation. The silence of the broader family, once a source of tension and speculation, became protective, allowing both sisters the space to navigate personal challenges authentically and without the weight of external judgment. Midway through this chapter, Amy experienced a breakthrough. In a particularly grueling session, she found herself holding a plank longer than she had believed possible, feeling the burn in her muscles, the rhythm of her breath, and the steady awareness of effort paying off. The ache, once discouraging, now signified strength. The tremor in her arms, endurance. The sweat, commitment. In that moment, Amy understood that true transformation was a convergence of physical effort, mental discipline, and emotional resilience, a holistic integration of body, mind, and spirit cultivated through persistent engagement and mindful practice. Tammy's parallel breakthrough emerged in the quiet aftermath of a challenging cooking session. The successful execution of a complex dish without guidance, combined with the self-reflection and patience practiced throughout the process, led to a tangible, internal shift. She experienced a new level of trust in her own judgment, a recognition of competence cultivated incrementally, and a confidence that extended beyond the kitchen into broader life decisions. These subtle yet profound changes marked an evolution from reactive, fear-driven responses to deliberate, empowered action, illustrating the nuanced process of transformation and the power of sustained, intentional effort.